heard of the quintessential Australian stories and folklore? We've decided to share some of the lesser-known tales. These are the kind of tales that interest us. And if you're interested in the history of Australia, the more obscure stories about places and people you may not have heard of, then stay tuned and enjoy this new series, Aussie Tales That You Weren't Taught. In this episode, we take a look at the world's most perfect woman. Professor Dudley Sargent of Harvard University, having completed his scientific research measuring 10,000 women, felt confident in his announcement that he had finally found the perfect female body. He reported that it belonged to a model for all young women for her beauty of outline and artistic proportions. Sargent announced the winner. Who was she? I will say without qualification that Miss Kellerman embodies all the physical attributes that most of us demand in the perfect woman. He was talking about Aussie sensation for the time, Annette Kellerman. She was the most famous Australian of her day. She was a singer like Kylie, a model like Elle, a feminist like Jermaine, an actor like Nicole, and was an athlete like Kathy Freeman. She was all of them in one, the world's most acclaimed female athlete and a show business superstar. Apart from being Australia's first movie star and a swimmer who could beat the best women and some of the best men in the world, Annette Kellerman was a great pioneer of the women's movement, perhaps 70 years ahead of her time. Annette was a swimmer, athlete, dancer, diver, actress, author, entertainer, designer, fitness expert, model, women's liberator, ruthless self-promoter, and movie star. Wow, she did pack a lot in for a woman in those times. Of course, that meant she came in for some harsh criticism. She may have been pronounced the world's most perfect woman, but there were many who thought of her the world's wickedest woman. But why? Let's go to her beginnings. Now, Annette Marie Sarah Kellerman was born in Sydney on the 6th of July in 1886. She was the second child of Frederick Kellerman, a German-born Australian violinist, and French mother Alice Ellen Laurentine Charbonnet, who was a sophisticated and musically gifted composer and pianist. Her mother Alice had arrived into Melbourne at the age of 21 to participate in Australia's first international exhibition in 1880. After her exhibition was over, she travelled to Sydney. Here she met fellow music lover Frederick Kellerman. They also fell in love with each other and married on the 18th of December of 1882. Together they opened a school of music and taught the wealthy. They also started a family, and Annette was born into such culture, surrounded also by the most elite of Sydney. However, life for Annette wasn't all roses and silver spoons. She developed rickets as a child, which is a bone disease that affects infants and young children caused by a lack of vitamin D, which prevents bones from developing properly. This caused Annette's legs to be bowed and would not take her weight. She was forced to wear heavy leg braces until she was 7 years old. One of her doctors encouraged her to take up swimming to strengthen her legs, which were crippled by it. Annette's early years were marked by many downs and very few ups. The Kellerman family fortune suffered during the financial depression of the 1890s, as the Conservatoire de Musique struggled to attract students while wealthy families in Sydney tightened their belts. The Federation drought, which began in 1894 and lasted until 1902, only worsened the situation for wealthy families whose fortunes relied on rural production. By the end of the decade, with Federation looming, the lingering Depression and the Australian colonies' involvement in the Boer War made it clear that a private music teaching business was no longer viable to support the Kellerman family. They struggled on, but the Conservatoire de Musique finally closed its doors. The Kellerman family faced many challenges. Annette's father, Frederick, struggled to support the family, leading to their relocation to Melbourne. Her relentless dedication to swimming and clean dives impressed her father, who believed there was money to be made from Annette's aquatic skills and exhibition dives. As Annette herself quoted in her unpublished autobiography, "From that day on, I swam anywhere, anytime, at the drop of a hat." A solution presented itself when Alice was offered a teaching position at a school in Melbourne, where she was still well remembered and could command good fees for private tuition outside of school hours. This school was known as the Simpson School, run by two spinster sisters, the Mrs. Simpson, and later evolved into Mentone Girls Grammar School. Annette's younger sister Marcel, who would remain her companion and support throughout her life, was the dux of the school in 1903 and 1904. While Marcel was learning, Annette was swimming to support the family, as Annette later would refer to it as swimming back at the family fortune. A newly run women's swimming championship in Redfern, Sydney, organised by some of the family's elite friends, were easily won by Annette. It was more of a demonstration of her abilities. She also competed in other swimming and diving competitions, winning them all and getting quite a reputation for herself as the best. New Idea magazine even interviewed her about it. Annette explaining to the magazine she had done her homework and her times were the best in almost all the world. That she and her father would eventually go to England and she would swim the English Channel. That was their goal. Until then, they were reunited then in Melbourne with the family. During Annette's brief time in Melbourne, she continued her studies at school. As the saying goes, she swam like a fish. By the time she was 16, she was swimming among them twice daily at the Melbourne Aquarium, earning the considerable sum of £5 a week to do so, with all the fish swimming around her within a large tank. She also performed as a mermaid at Princess Court Amusement Park on the Yarra River, where she would dive from a height and at a great speed in a glittery, beautiful outfit. She could hold her breath underwater too, giving the audience a scare, only to pop back to the surface for an almighty cheer. Although her younger sister, a good academic, and her brothers were all accomplished violinists, Annette was the most popular. All of the family, as well as close friends, the Cavills, who had instructed all the children in swimming, were part of a theatre play in Melbourne. The Kellerman name surpassed all others involved due to Annette's amazing aquatic feats. This helped promote her to celebrity status in Australia and raise money to get her to England and make her dream a reality. In early 1905, Annette's father took her to London with the hopes of making their fortune. Initially, she didn't do too well. No one showed the least interest in a girl from down under who could swim. Then, as a publicity stunt, Annette, dressed in a one-piece swimsuit, swam 15 miles up the Thames River right through the heart of London on the 30th of June 1905, capturing the attention of all the press and promoters from all over Europe. She was paid by the Daily Mail to swim 70 kilometres a week from Dover to Margate, beach to beach, all through summer. The Daily Mail also sponsoring her in her attempt to swim the English Channel. To commemorate the 30th anniversary of Captain Webb's crossing, in the lead-up, Annette became the most famous and photographed woman in Britain. Even the Cadbury Chocolate Company began sponsoring her, featuring her in their Bourneville cocoa ads dressed as a mermaid. On August the 25th, Annette and 4 fit men attempted to cross the English Channel. The men were allowed to swim naked, covered in seal fat for warmth. But for Annette, she was in her one-piece suit coated in porpoise oil. They were given a sandwich every hour by pole from a tugboat to keep up their strength. But in addition to her sponsorship deal with Cadbury, she had to have a drink of hot chocolate during her rest stops, which combined with the choppiness of the water made her feel quite ill. After 4 hours of swimming, the weather turned bad and they struggled to go on. 2 of the men quit, but as Annette was paid a bonus by the hour in her sponsorship deal with the Daily Mirror, she battled on for 2 more hours before she was completely exhausted and pulled into a tugboat. A month later in Paris, Annette made headlines as the only woman competitor in a 12-kilometre race down the River Seine. 17 men started beside her, but only 4 swimmers finished, and only 2 finished ahead of her. In June of 1906, Annette tried a 3rd and final attempt to swim the channel. Although this time she was in the water for 10.5 hours, she still fell short, but only just. The Prince of Wales, famously fascinated by the female form, asked her to give an exhibition of her swimming at the London Bath Club. Annette agreed, provided she could wear the costume she had used in her channel attempt. She was still a teenager, vibrant, fresh and attractive. Her one-piece swimsuit, created by stitching black stockings into a boy's costume, revealed her slim, athletic body, which was unusual for the time when plumpness was the measure of a desirable woman. The middle class was scandalised, but the future king, whose mistresses included Lily Langtry and many of the great courtesans of France, was delighted. Annette's fame was assured, and women's swimwear, which had until then consisted of smocks and stockings designed to obscure the female form, was about to change forever. She did a brief season at the London Hippodrome to an audience of more than 1,300. By now, she had a vaudeville act that included aquatic feats and later encompassed acrobatics, wire walking, singing and ballet dancing before mirrors, and then went to America later that year. She was a sensation for a huge fee of $1,250 a week. The 20-year-old Australian Mermaid swam in a glass tank at the White City Fairgrounds in Chicago, then Boston and New York. A year later, she won priceless press coverage when she was arrested on Boston Beach for wearing a brief one-piece swimsuit. She won the landmark case and irrevocably changed the design of women's swimsuits. Kellerman married American-born manager James Sullivan on or around the 26th of November 1912 at Danbury, Connecticut, and then went inevitably to Hollywood. She starred in several films. In one, she had to dive 28 metres from a cliff top into the sea, a world record for a woman. She did all of her own stunts, and in Daughter of the Gods, the first film with a $1 million budget, as well as being the first woman to appear nude on film, she had to dive 19 metres into a pool filled with crocodiles. Steve Irwin would have been happy. A ladder was out of camera range, and Annette later recalled, "I dived under those crocs and was up that ladder before you could say snap." When Harvard's Professor Sargent, encouraging healthy exercise, announced after a much publicised search that Annette was the perfect woman. In 1912, she became one of the world's best-known performers and in such demand from rival studios and theatrical promoters that she could afford to turn down a 5-picture deal with 20th Century Fox. The professor, using graphs and charts, demonstrated that Annette Kellerman's dimensions approximated those of the Venus de Milo. She herself didn't fully agree with the professor. She was perfect, she said, only from the neck down. Annette was a lifelong vegetarian and advocate of exercise and diet. She also owned a health food store in Long Beach, California, later on in life. Her corset-free curves, a revelation in 1910, were a harbinger of the feminists' burn the bra call 60 years later. But 3 decades later, she became the subject of a Hollywood biopic. Loosely based on her life, The $1 Million Mermaid, starring Esther Williams, was a Hollywood success. Although Annette served as a consultant on the movie, she didn't care for it, calling it namby-pamby. The film failed to capture the kaleidoscopic personality that was Annette Kellerman. She seemed to be able to do it all, a dazzling performer on the high wire, a ballet dancer, a tough competitor on the tennis court, an accomplished linguist, and a songwriter. Above all, she was a propagandist for the joys of life. She said, "If only you could know what it is to walk and work and play and feel every inch of you, rejoicing in glorious, buoyant life." Her attitudes towards health and beauty anticipated modern views, and she was a forthright advocate for women left at home with children. She remained active well into her old age, continuing to swim and exercise until a short time before her death. She and her husband returned to live in Australia in 1970, and in 1974 she was honoured by the International Swimming Hall of Fame at Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Kellerman outlived her husband and died in the hospital at Southport in Queensland on the 6th of November 1975, aged 89, in the week of the dismissal of the Whitlam government. For once in her life, she couldn't take that headline. She was cremated with Roman Catholic rites. Her remains were scattered in the Great Barrier Reef, and she had no children. But I'll tell you what, I bet you weren't taught about her in school. I'd never heard of her before, and she had my name. What? I'd heard of Annette Funicello, an American from the Mouseketeers, but Annette Kellerman was so much bigger. She could do anything. Well, she's definitely a role model for Australian girls today, but no one talks about her. Well, we have. And if you liked that episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you know what to do about that bell. Till next time, keep your eyes out for the next story on Aussie Tales You Weren't Taught.